Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is Dawisson Lopes, and along with Professor Aziz Saliba, we'll be chairing this very special panel on the current challenges faced by North America. And for this, I and Aziz, we may rely on a very distinguished panel, a true band of rock stars, which is composed of first, Professor Bjarne Melkevik, he who is a full professor in the law department at Université Laval. He's got connections all around the world and also with Brazil. His field of expertise is the philosophy of law. And I thank him very much for accepting this invitation to join us this morning in the Americas. Ambassador Benoni Belli, thank you very much for accepting this invitation. Benoni, he is currently the Consul General of Brazil in Chicago, and formerly has been the head of Brazil's Ministry of Foreign Affairs Department for the United States of America. And before this, he has also been Itamaraty's short for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brazil, has been Itamaraty's head of the policy planning department as well. Not to mention his previous experiences in the United States, be it at the embassy in Washington or joining the mission to the United Nations. If I were the president of Brazil, I would definitely pick this man as my ambassador to the United States. Thirdly, we have Jean Daudelin. Jean, he who is a scholar, an associate professor at the very prestigious Norman Paterson School at Carleton University in Canada. He's an expert in international affairs. I have had a pleasure to co-supervise one doctoral student, Mario Valente, in the company of Professor Daudelin. And due to his inputs, this has been a very, very successful thesis. It's getting a lot of recognition, but it's all on him. I mean, it's his fault, definitely. And Jill Blondin, thank you very much for accepting to be with us this morning. Jill she's the executive director of the Global Education Office at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, United States of America. She's also been a Fulbright specialist to Brazil. She's visited us some time ago. We could learn lots from her, especially with regard to the process of internationalization of higher education and research in the world. Thank you guys very much. We really appreciate your time and your willingness to share your knowledge about Canada and the US. And I should start you should have some 10 minutes to freely elaborate on whichever topics you decide. But I will just leave you with the following teaser or provocation. We are now 3 weeks' time from Canada's and US national days. Canada, the 1st of July, the US, the 4th of July. Tell me, is there anything from your viewpoints? Is there anything to celebrate? Thank you very much. And now I should give the floor to Benoni Belli first. You're the first speaker of the morning.
Thank you, Professor Dawisson Belém Lopes and Professor Aziz Saliba. Nice to see you again, even though only virtually. I'd rather be there in Minas Gerais, having a pão de queijo with you, but unfortunately, with the travel restrictions nowadays, it's not possible. An honor to be here with my fellow panelists who are distinguished scholars and experts. I am not a thinker. I'd like to say that and begin saying that. I'm a practitioner, a career diplomat. So, of course, this will explain my limitations here. But please bear with me if I sound not as scholarly as I should in an event like this one. Professor Belém Lopes assigned the hard task, and he keeps adding new tasks for us. So I'll stick with the first tasks, which are already Herculean, was to talk about the main challenges facing the world and North America in particular nowadays. And to do this in a 10-minute frame, it is also very challenging, to say the least. But then we'll have time after to discuss a little bit more about and elaborate the ideas that we are going to present here in the first round. So, well, when we talk about global challenges seen from the perspective of North America, and I will concentrate my remarks on the USA, since I'm living in this country right now. And it's important to know who is the agent that is supposed to face such challenges, just to start. Let's limit a little bit the scope of my remarks. The views on the main challenges will, of course, vary if the agent here is the neutral, between quotation marks, analyst, the pundit, the scholar, or the Biden administration, the foreign relations and national security establishment, the civil society, the corporations. So to save time, let me refer first to the current US government and the American establishment. In the sequence, I will add a few elements from my own perspective as a foreign diplomat here, who lives in the US and had a previous experience, as Dawisson mentioned, in observing American political landscape. Well, the four main challenges from the perspective of the administration were enunciated during the campaign and in the Biden's inaugural address, as well as it has become clear over the last 2 or 3 months. And I would like to pick the four of them, right? First, the need to tackle the pandemic and its ramifications in terms of health, economic, and social crisis and distress. This is a main challenge from their perspective, and very important, maybe the mother of all challenges right now. The importance of dealing with racial divisions and racial conflict. It's another point that was also highlighted during the campaign. The climate change and the rise of China, right? Well, not all of them are global challenges per se, but all have an international and a global dimension. And since the US is so important in the world, even a purely domestic challenge can have global repercussions and become a global challenge for others. So it's important to bear that in mind as well. Well, what strikes everyone that follow US politics and society is the fact that there is a low degree of consensus on the main challenges and how to face these challenges. So this is another chance. I keep adding layers of challenges, right? Wherever you look, you see new challenges to deal with the challenges that you had previously identified. So this is something that is very important to bear in mind as well, and we can discuss it further in our conversation. The exception of those four challenges that I mentioned, the exception that I will call that has a bipartisanship around it in terms of agreeing that this is really a great challenge and and that we need to tackle this problem is, of course, the rise of China, right? And I can give you a few examples for the last weeks that what we witnessed here in the US. I know you were aware of the US Senate passing a bill called US Innovation and Competition Act, which is designed to respond to China's growing economic influence around the world, especially in the areas of technology, cybersecurity, and global supply chains, manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, etc. Second, the Biden administration has also banned Americans from investing in 59 Chinese defense and surveillance technology companies, including groups like Huawei, very well known all over the world. It's a telecoms equipment manufacturer, and also the China's largest chip maker. The name is Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation. So then, besides that, there has been no sign of winding down Trump-era sanctions against China. Buy America initiative has been strengthened. So these are a few examples. We could talk about the other challenges posed by China, the fact that the policy planning staff had issued a policy paper on China last year, which was during Trump, but it seems that it has not been rejected. It identified China as the main strategic challenge for the US. The NATO summit yesterday and the day before, and where China was also singled out as one of the main challenges for the Atlantic Alliance, which is new because, of course, the traditional challenge and rival there is Russia, which was also mentioned, of course, 60 times. But in the final communique, you had China mentioned 10 times, which is not, which is very important as well. Well, the US foreign policy and national security establishment can agree that China is the most important strategic challenge, although not the only one, of course, facing the United States. I have already mentioned Russia, but if you go back a few years and read that article by Walter Russell Mead, The Return of Geopolitics, and he mentioned the new assertive powers in different regions of the world that were challenging American dominance. And you see also Iran and in Middle East as part of this equation. Of course, in this, he mentioned three, and China is clearly the most important nowadays due to its competition power in not only in purely military and regional affairs, but in technology as well, which now has this spillover effect. Who dominates, the advancement of technology will also dominate the economy of the 21st century and have the most efficient military. So this has so many implications that China has. That explains why China now is so important from this perspective. And well, I'd like to point out that there is a deep division in the American political system and society, as I mentioned before, on how to face all these challenges. As I mentioned, China may be an exception in that regard because there is more bipartisanship, but you have here the other issues that I mentioned, like racial conflicts, the pandemic, the climate change. Some of them are not even considered challenged from the perspective of part of the society and political analysts and pundits. So there is this deep division. Some, of course, are more domestic in nature, like racial discrimination. Others require domestic action and international cooperation in the context of mounting distrust in government, growing inequality, and international rivalries. So division and polarization is a formidable obstacle, I think, for Americans to deal effectively with the challenges and even to come to an agreement on which are the main threats and risks which public policies should be pursued, which long-term strategy should be put in place in all these areas. So it's another layer of challenge, as I mentioned before. There is this combination of unprecedented pandemic and mounting strategic and geoeconomic, we could call it, competition, coupled with deep disagreement, resentment, and decisive and divisive domestic politics. You can remember not long ago, the invasion of the capital was maybe the tip of the iceberg, because there are other things. And beside that, look at the ongoing fight at the state level on election laws, for instance. There's a big fight. It's not really, in Brazil, people are not paying attention to that, but it's very important to take a look. The divisive debate on racial discrimination, that's also very complicated nowadays, and how to address the problem. The issue of the Black Lives Matter movement, the reaction against defunding the police, and the discussion of the right to bear arms. All this is very divisive and has become even more divisive along the way. I know that Dawisson is already worded. I'm going to end right now in a few minutes, maybe 20 more minutes and I'm done, okay? Don't worry. To make things worse, there is an underlying tension between global competition for power and economic dominance on the one hand, and the need of international cooperation to find solutions for common problems on the other. Problems such as, pandemic, peace and security, refugees and IDPs, poverty and hunger, disasters and emergency relief response, climate change, human rights, disarmament, among others. There's this, on the one hand, you have the competition with more power politics and rivalries, and on the other, the problems that we face that are in global nature, they need cooperation, and how you can overcome this contradiction. This is something that I'd like to discuss with you. In the US, domestic challenges tend to become, as I mentioned, global challenges because of the political and economic weight of the country as well. Well, to put it in a nutshell, and I'm almost concluding now, I promise, Dawisson, global competition needs to be contained, I think. Now I'm going to this prescription, okay? As Pierre Bourdieu used to say, when you describe, you are also prescribing, right? So I would be more explicit and prescribe a little bit the recipes here. Very general, of course. Global competition needs to be contained to a point that could not jeopardize the capacity of international institutions to take decisions and deal effectively with climate change and other global issues. This is the first thing. These are not really prescriptions. They are just, ideas for us to, food for thought, actually. The US politics should be able to overcome the current explosive divisiveness that would make the country less capable to play a constructive role in global affairs. Domestic and international factors will increasingly become intertwined as we need to act both locally and globally to face challenges to security, prosperity, and health of people. You see the pandemic, the first response was national, but now people realize that if you do not have vaccines for everybody, you can protect your people at first, but then the variants will come and your economy will not, come back to growth, and the health of the people will still be at risk. So this is the idea here. Democratic institutions in the US and elsewhere, not only in the US, need to show resilience and keep their ability to shape domestic and foreign policies that live up to the global challenges ahead, helping to bring about international environment more conducive to effective joint efforts in a wide range of areas that we need global action and international cooperation. And climate change probably is the most important one, because it on the action and this matter depends the future of all humanity. The mother of all challenges perhaps is seeing this basic fact of that I've just mentioned of 21st century life, that we are together in the world. This is obvious, but as George Orwell used to say, to see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle, right? Thank you so much, David and Aziz.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Benoni. 12 minutes, wonderfully respectful of the time limit. And now invite Professor Melkevik to join us. You have the floor, Bjarne.
Thanks. Everybody can listen to me?
Yes, perfect.
Yes. Okay, that's okay. I will first thank the organizers, Daudelin, Belém, and Aziz Saliba, for inviting me. I do not consider my expert in international relation at all. I'm a more political, social, legal philosopher, and I just using to think, and thinking, as you know, is hazardous. You can even get the right answer, but you can also get the wrong answer. So when I was thinking about North America, I was just observing that I was including Canada, United States, and Mexico, because I was thinking of that as a sort of region, which is has its internal problems, and which is very diversified, because when I'm speaking from Canada and from French speaking in Canada, the world is just a little different. Because I could see that this region has its own problem. And maybe the most problematic region is Canada. Because one of the things which is happening in this North American region is that if you see traditional, Canada was the biggest commercial partner to the United States. But today, it's Mexico, which is the biggest commercial partner, trading partner to the United States. And even when I was seeing what Canada is selling to the United States, I was just seeing that for 40 years ago, we were selling commodities. Now we're selling raw materials. Oil was traditionally 4%. Now it's a 14%. So it's simple. Something is just taking part inside this North American region. And it's Mexico, which is coming up, and it's Canada, which is going down. But that's amazing, because that's not how it should be, should it? Mexico was considered as a small part, but that's the region. And if you see that the region do not have other problems, that the global challenges is defined by what's going on in this region. And if you see that the biggest problem is maybe that we do not have any problem at all. It's just going very well in North America. And we do not have any enemies. The big political problem will maybe be with Russia, but not what Beloni was thinking about, because the big problem with Russia, which is a global challenge, is to divide Antarctic. Antarctic is just being now divided, and everybody is just making position how to divide the Arctic region. And it's a simple: Canada will win, Greenland will lose. Why? Because you have the region, and Greenland, well, if somebody would buy it, they could maybe do it. Trump was proposing, but it was not receiving. So that's the big problem, if you see it just on a big level. So when we understand the global challenges, we should see what's going on inside this region. I repeat, a global challenge is a challenge for the region which is inside. And what do we see then? Well, the problem is that we do not have other problem than strategical problem. One strategical problem is, should this region uphold its traditional role, position in the world? And that's economic, commercial, trade problem. So we can say that we have only one problem in this region. It's the strategical problem, how to uphold the position of the North American region. To understand that problem, we should go inside the region and look what's happening. And what we should just observe is that we observe an industrial fragility. The economy do not function optimally and correctly. Why? Because the supply chain is disrupted and broken. That's the problem with China. It's simple, it's a Chinese problem. Because when we're looking at the trade exchange, we see that North America trade between them. Canada on one side, Mexico on the other side, United States in the middle. But that's not a chain of modern production. And what Benoni Belli was just rightfully focusing on was the problem with China. Look at what's happening today. In the newspaper today, there was once again focusing that we cannot produce cars. Why can we not produce cars? Because we have a short supply of semiconductors. And we cannot produce other commodity because we do not master the chains of production. So we cannot produce cars because we do not have a semiconductor, which is produced in China. And we observe the same thing on the level of batteries, on the medical supplements, on military technology, and so on, where we do not have what is called rare earth metals. We cannot produce because China do not want to export what's called rare earth metals. And that's just handicapping all the structure from the origin to the supply, to the commodity production. So what you see is just the economy is just continually undermined. It's like you have built a big structure on sand. And as you know from the Bible, you should not construct on sand. But when you have constructed your economy on sand, it's just undermining, it's souls falling back, it's disappearing, and the structure is just getting more and more unstable. And when you cannot produce cars any longer, you must import them. But that's the same problem you can see in Europe. They cannot do neither. And it was just thought in the COVID crisis, actually the pandemic, we didn't have medical equipment. We did not have the industrial chain to produce what the people wanted. As we do not have the chain to produce what the industry need to function. We do have all this commodity importation, which making everybody happy, because we can be happy all day in consuming made in Canada. Sorry, made in China. But that's not industry. So what we're seeing is simple. The region is undermined by a structural problem. We do not produce correctly. And to finish, because I was understanding that I was talking too much, and the big problem in this region is not industrial. The big problem that we should solve is Wall Street. That's the big problem. That's the cancer in the system. Why? Because money is not producing anything. And one problem with the financial capital is it's just accumulating itself without producing anything. And this region's economic problem is as simple, which is just change the financial system, get out of it, and to assure that money serve the economy and not the other way around. If we do not do that, it's simple. North America will just have more and more economic problems. Thanks.
Thank you, Bjarne. It was a great intervention. You were not speaking too much. You're speaking beautifully. And just to clarify one thing, one aspect, you're right with regard to Mexico. Geographically, as a region, Mexico is an integral part of North America. But since we have, as I mentioned in the beginning, this series of events is motivated by the launch of a book series which aims to divide the world into 6 macro regions. And we have taken the difficult decision to let Mexico integrate it into Latin America. But we are totally allowed to bring Mexico back in. We can do it anytime. But Mexico will be given time and due attention in the next session we are holding within this series of events. This is why. But again, Mexico is very welcome to this debate. Professor Jill Blondin, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the organizers, Dawisson and Aziz, for inviting me to speak today. And I want to say hello to all my friends in Brazil and at UFMG. So thank you. I also want to thank Benoni for his talk, because it really set up a lot of what I'm going to say. And I really appreciate the context and the conversation that will follow. So thank you too. I'm excited to share my reflections and ideas with you. I'll discuss major global challenges from a North American perspective, specifically challenges as they impact American higher education, which is the field in which I work. Working in higher education informs my perspective, and American universities and colleges are in many ways a microcosm of the United States. Although there are many challenges I could discuss today, I'm going to focus on one topic during my brief conversation, which is the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on internationalization. Nearly 16 months after COVID-19 shut down so much of life as we knew it, we are navigating a new environment with new opportunities for engagement. I'm hesitant to refer to now as a post-pandemic world because we all know that's simply not the case. COVID-19 persists. Yet I will discuss the challenges through the prism of global education. I will add that just as we can identify global challenges through higher education, we can also look to universities around the world as part of the solution to the challenges that we face and within our own countries. Last month, Inside Higher Education, a publication in the United States on higher ed, opened an article called Restarting Study Abroad by stating, quote, "Few sectors of higher ed have been hit as hard by the pandemic as study abroad." In March 2020, my office at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia, in the United States, recalled more than 100 students back to the United States as COVID-19 spread across the world. And this was just the beginning. Study abroad and student mobility, which are critical parts of internationalization, stopped completely or dropped precipitously. There was a 16% decline in international students studying in the United States and at US institutions online in the fall 2020 semester due to the impact of the pandemic, according to the 2020 Fall Student Enrollment Snapshot Survey, which is conducted by 9 partner institutions and the Institute of International Education in the United States. In the wake of these incredible changes, in which traditional approaches to comprehensive internationalization were no longer available, colleges and universities in the United States had to move beyond mobility and focus on the why of internationalization. This was difficult for many institutions, which had focused on the money that international students brought to their campuses and to the US economy. And the numbers are not insignificant. According to the US Department of Commerce, international students contributed $45 billion to the US economy in 2018. In the 2019 to 2020 academic year, international students contributed more than $39 billion to the US economy and supported nearly 416,000 jobs. In the state of Virginia, where I live, more than 20,000 international students contributed $717.5 million to the state's economy and supported nearly 8,500 jobs. Just to give you an idea of this impact. With consulate closures, flights grounded, and travel restrictions worldwide, international student enrollment in the US then dropped 43%, according to the Institute of International Education. With foreign tuition revenues being of such great significance, this has had a huge impact on not just the higher education sector, but on the US economy. Furthermore, the pandemic crisis has revealed other global challenges in higher education that are also felt more broadly. Travel and immigration limitations, the concern for the well-being and personal safety of students abroad. One example would be Chinese students, who make up the largest percentage of international students in the United States, have concerns about stigma due to COVID-19 and political tensions, which were mentioned in the first presentation as well. Not the students specifically, but the tensions and the dialogue. Universities in the US must now see internationalization, including engagement, research, and the curriculum as the outcomes that increase enrollment. COVID-19 has forced universities to move away from traditional mobility in their strategies, and now it can only be part of the process. It can no longer be the outcome as it was. Universities must be more intentional and have a deliberate strategy for comprehensive internationalization in order to improve their relevance. We also must ask ourselves, what do we want from internationalization and what can we do? In fact, COVID-19 ultimately created opportunities for enhanced collaborations and a different way of engaging. Collaborations allow us to navigate a public health crisis through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which was another topic mentioned earlier that is part of a dialogue and a lot of conversation in the United States. For example, we must recognize that different factors, including race, socioeconomic status, and technology access, affect the way the pandemic has affected our students, faculty, and staff. Maintaining student engagement has been a challenge for universities and colleges. How do we build community, for instance, especially virtually? How do we build classes and curriculum so that all students can be completely engaged? And how do we return to a robust in-person campus life? And what have we learned to improve this experience for faculty and students? And how do we work together for solutions? Global partnerships and relationships, while challenging, can innovate and can help us work locally and globally toward solutions to problems. Recently in a webinar, Dr. Anthony Fauci stated that, quote, international cooperation and collaboration are essential to advance scientific discovery and to manage the global health crisis. COVID-19 specifically highlighted how critical international collaborations are. Think of vaccine development, for instance, because universities and colleges and their international partners can tackle global issues, not just due to the sharing of the recognition of global issues, but by leveraging resources. International cooperation capacity building can focus on connecting knowledge and fostering innovation between nations. International partnerships and research collaborations allow us to advance scientific inquiry, but they also allow us to leverage resources, including conferences, virtual laboratories, and other research facilities. In the last presentation that Benoni gave, it was also mentioned the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, which was passed last week by the Senate, which contains $250 billion for science and technology research, but also has a number of provisions that will be very challenging. The pandemic has made us work together and work quickly, and has even democratized international capabilities. These things could have taken a long time to figure out, but we have not had the luxury of time during the pandemic. In some ways, connections have been easier due to the opportunities to meet virtually. I'm thinking of this conversation that we're having right now. At Virginia Commonwealth University, we created a way, for instance, for VCU students to connect with their international counterparts through cultural conversations, simple virtual meetings with students that enabled them to talk with each other, learn, and build their own cultural agility and skills. What will the future of internationalization look like? There will continue to be opportunities for different types of partnerships, along with increased research collaborations. There may also be, in addressing costs and decreased mobility, more US campuses that offer students international experiences at home on campuses that do not require students to travel abroad for their education. In conclusion, the challenges of COVID-19 continue to reverberate in the higher education sector. A critical thread of my presentation today is that higher education challenges mirror those of the world, from mobility to the economy, to global health, to partnerships and collaborations. My view of global challenges is informed by the work that I do every single day. Looking at COVID-19 and its impact, as well as the opportunities that arise in this new world, prepare us for the future. And there is reason for optimism. So to answer Dawison's question, his query, is there anything to celebrate in the next few weeks here in the United States? I would respond with a quote from the writer Malcolm Gladwell by saying, I think we're in a different world now, and it is a much better place. It is a much more hopeful place and a much stronger and more resilient place. That's the world we have to be ready for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's such a coincidence. I've been reading Malcolm Gladwell for some time now. Aziz can give a testimonial on this. And I tend to agree with your points, very sharply expressed the idea that the global education offices, international education offices, they serve as microcosms for one to understand the reach of this pandemic in every dimension. So, I mean, great intervention. Thank you. Professor Daudelin, you have the floor, 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. I mean, this looks like a very interesting thing to do for 2 hours. I'd like to apologize to you and Aziz for not having yet checked your book, but be assured that I will certainly have a look at it and probably benefit from reading it. I'll start with your provocation. Is there anything to celebrate? Will there be anything to celebrate for Canada? I would say that at this point, it will probably be the saddest Canada Day that I've seen in my whole life. A few weeks back, the bodies of 215 Indigenous children were found in a hidden cemetery behind residential schools that was run by the Catholic Church and set up and financed by the federal government. leading to, let's say, a broad-based recognition of the terrible treatment of Indigenous people by Canada. And just last week, 4 Muslims walking the street in London, west of Toronto, were killed in a terrorist attack. And so basically Canada Day will this year be a time of memorials, of fundraising for the surviving children of that family, and let's say a time of reckoning with the past and the present. So not much to celebrate. And in fact, I read this morning that that the city of Victoria, the capital of British Columbia, has decided to cancel any celebration of Canada Day. So your provocation was very insightful. Okay. Now to the challenges. I would like just to start with general. I think a general assessment of what I think is the biggest global challenge, and then I can talk about North America and Canada. I think the biggest challenge, domestic and international, is inequality. Inequality at the domestic level, inequality internationally. A case in point is COVID. See, I think it's the prototype of a challenge that we will be meeting increasingly in the future, and at the same time, a good example of the inequality that prevails in Canada. I mean, I've been vaccinated. Everybody I know has been vaccinated. First shot. I'll get my second shot in a few weeks. I was just checking with friends in Pernambuco, and they were telling me that it's likely that poor people in Brazil will have to wait probably until the end of the year, and possibly later. And in sub-Saharan Africa, they may have to wait until the end of 2022. So that's a reflection on one side of the stupendous inequality that prevails in the world, and of the consequences that it could have, because as was just mentioned, late vaccines mean variants, possibilities of mutations, and then a restart of the whole mess. Okay. Now, how did Canada escape this? Canada does not. I think Bjarne was right. Canada didn't produce vaccines. It didn't have equipment and so on. And when you check death rates in the G7, Canada is among the top. Canada doesn't, even for vaccines, more people are vaccinated in Canada than basically anywhere in the world right now. And how did Canada pull it off? With money. It just secured millions of contracts and imported vaccines, including from a country like India, which is going through a much worse pandemic, and whose vaccination campaign is much less advanced. So I think that's just an illustration of the challenge of inequality, which I think underlies both a large number of other challenges that we're confronting, climate change and so on, but also of the way in which it's likely to prevent us from addressing them adequately. Okay, so that's big picture. Smaller picture, and on this, I mean, I think I was inspired by Benoni Belli. In Canada, there's one big file, foreign policy file, and it's bilateral relations with the U.S. And it's not going well, and it matters because on any of those files, on almost any of those files, what the U.S. does is likely to have a huge impact on how Canada can tackle the problems and on the severity of the problems it can tackle. And at this point, the relationship with the United States is not good. Protectionism now. I mean, even the Republicans have become protectionists. Okay, by the Buy America Act of Joe Biden will further restrict exports from Canada. So that's an issue. Even the green agenda, on which in principle people agree, Canada still depends quite a bit on exports of energy, and now Biden is cutting pipelines. So this will have an impact on Canada's fiscal capacity to finance the transition to a green economy. There are deep divisions in the U.S. that were already mentioned, and the unpredictability that this introduces in terms of public policy, foreign policy, trade policy, is something that is, it's a major problem for Canada. And finally, I'd say there's an increasingly divergent political outlook, social and political outlook, regarding immigration, regarding abortion, regarding a number of issues where Canadians used to feel that they share the agenda with the United States. And right now we see that it's not the case with a large proportion of the population there. And so this creates an environment that is not very amenable to cooperation and joint work to tackle global challenges. My last point, and it's a bit longer, is it's something that Bjarne already mentioned, and I mean, you started, I understand, Mexico, Latin America, and so on, but I want to discuss the possibility of collective action in North America, and I think it's a major problem. I think it's a major problem for a number of reasons, some of which have been already mentioned, including myself, the divisions with the U.S. But more fundamentally, there was this idea that because of the level of interdependence between the United States and its two neighbors, the scale of the trade, the energy dependence of the United States relative to Canada and Mexico, because of the car industry, the auto industry, the auto sector, that was really an integrated supply chain and so on, that this was going somewhere. And in a way, in 1994, with the signing of NAFTA, and now with its revamping a few years back, there was this idea that what was being institutionalized was some kind of deep integration. And what happened, in fact, is that it did not happen. What we have at best are two North Americas, and from that standpoint, there's a North America that's Canada-US, and there's a North America that's Mexico-US, and the problems are completely different. Completely different. See, I'll just take an example. I could talk about migration, and we may want to go back to this, but I'll take the question of global warming, of climate change. See, Mexico and the U.S., almost all of Mexico and the Midwest are basically drying out. The west coast of the United States, southwest of the United States is burning every year. The east coast is being flooded, and the Gulf of Mexico has huge problems, Louisiana, New Orleans, and so on. Canada is escaping from this. So there will be necessary adaptations, but Canada and Russia, by the way, which is likely to be one of the few winners of climate change, essentially because of the significant increase in agricultural potential. Okay, in a world where food will be at food production will be at a premium. So yes, we're all deindustrializing and so on, but industry now is a minor part of the economy. Okay, so Canada is likely to be advantaged from that standpoint. Its situation is radically different from that of its neighbors, who will be basically fighting over water. Okay, so we have an issue there that's clearly distinguishes Canada's agenda from that of its neighbors. Now, if you put what I've been saying together in a way, Canada's tensions with the United States, the declining weight of the United States in Canada's trade as a partner. Canada is diversified away from the United States, and the United States is diversified away from Canada too. What you have is very low capability to act together, because we're thrown back to some kind of voluntarism. And disinterest and voluntarism is great, but there's nothing that focuses the mind more than real interest and substantive interdependence. And there's very little of this in North America right now. So there's a reason why you have all these tensions. It's basically because below all of these things, there's no strong reason to cooperate, because we don't have the same priorities and we're unlikely to gain and lose in the same way in the coming future. So I'll stop there, and I'll be happy to address challenges and other issues.
Great intervention as well, very nicely framed. I should now invite my dear colleague and friend, Professor Aziz Saliba, to make his comments and to put his questions forth.
Well, thank you very much, Dawisson. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to work with Dawisson. We've been working together for over a decade now, and perhaps this series is our biggest tangible result of our cooperation. And but I hope that many other, if not book series, many other products will come out of this cooperation in the near future. And it's a pleasure to be here among this very distinguished panel. It's a pleasure to see the members here again, and was great to hear your views on global challenges. I will try to pose questions. I'll try to do the following: pose questions to each member of this panel separately, and then throw a couple of questions afterwards, throw a couple of questions to the panel as a whole, so that if you want to react, you'll be more than welcome to do so. And I'll pose the questions in the order of that we have the speakers presenting here. So I'll begin with Ambassador Benoni Belli. Benoni, it was always great to hear you. You have addressed the main challenges of the Biden administration, such as the need to attack the pandemic and its ramifications, the importance of dealing with race divisions, climate change, and rise of China. When President Obama met President Trump, the incoming President Trump, he mentioned that North Korea was perhaps the biggest challenge that Trump would face. And it has been reported that the Biden administration will adopt a different strategy towards North Korea. It will supposedly be different, not only from Trump's strategy, as it was obviously expected, but also from Obama's. And what I'm very interested in hearing what future you see for North Korea. Do you believe it will be a threat to regional security? Do you think it will be unified with South Korea? Or perhaps it will be just a case of maintenance of the status quo? Maybe I should already pose the question to my friend Bjarne. And I will here tackle a more local challenge, because I had the chance of being at Université Laval, where I had Bjarne as my colleague, and this is a topic that interests me very much, and Bjarne, as a Francophile, is perhaps very capable of addressing this issue, which is nationalism in Quebec. Perhaps one of the greatest challenges for the Trudeau government is nationalism in Quebec, which I understand has been strengthened by François Legault's actions, or at least its rhetoric. So, and I completely understand the challenges for the survival of the French language and of the Quebecois culture. So I'm very interested in hearing about nationalism and separatism in Quebec. What future you see for these movement? Do you see Quebec as a separate entity in the near future? For Professor Blondin, before the pandemic, the National Center for Education Statistics in the US estimated that 25% of college students took at least one course online. And obviously the pandemic has forced institutions of higher learning and students to turn to online education even more. However, different studies from 2016 to 2019 show dropout rates from 50 to 80%. In this case, my question is the future that you see for online education after the pandemic. Will it play a much larger role, a slightly larger role, or will it remain the same? Finally, for Professor Jean Daudelin, which has very well addressed the issue of inequality in domestic and the international levels, I'm interested in hearing your views about the relation with China, the North American relation with China. The rise of China is perceived as a challenge to the US government. But as you have put it, Canada and the US do not necessarily go hand to hand in every issue. So, and China has become a very important commercial partner for Canada. I believe it's the second most relevant commercial partner for Canada at this moment. So how do you see relations between Canada and China in the near future? So once again, I'd like to thank all of you for the excellent presentations, and thank my dear friend Dawisson for helping organizing this, and it has been, and say that it has been a pleasure to work with him, to organize this book with him, and to participate in these panels.
Thank you, Aziz. Benoni Belli, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Professor Aziz Saliba, for your question. Of course, I'm not an expert in North Korea, and you know, American foreign policy deals with the whole world and different, very specific dossiers. So it's difficult for someone to be an expert in everything that the US does in the world. So, but anyway, I'll try my best just to give you, general ideas of what I saw when I was here and before coming here, especially in Brasilia. And I remember that the Trump's decision to engage with the leader of North Korea was received by critics here in the US and experts that's something not effective in terms of rewarding someone that had not done what should be done to deserve some kind of recognition, international recognition. There were critics even that said that Trump had a better relationship with the dictator of North Korea than with some European leaders, Western leaders. And so it created a few resentments, but Trump had this idea that he could solve the problem by himself, engaging and talking. And there was something positive behind that, because people tend just to dismiss everything that Trump does, right? Especially the experts. But there is something positive. The aspect that I see that was positive is that behind that, photo op and all that, the idea of doing some kind of diplomacy, of trying diplomacy to try to solve problems that are very difficult, very complicated. It's a good start, let's say. Of course, you have to be a good negotiator. You have to take into account the interests of other partners, like South Korea, like China in this case as well. So they are also part of the equation, and to try to solve a problem and try to manage a situation. And not all of these elements were present in Trump's strategy, but there was one element, the idea that diplomacy should prevail. And this is something that it's the positive aspect. I think that Biden will revert back to Obama's view on North Korea. Of course, they will not reward and talk directly and have hold summits with the North Korean leader, because they say this has not paid off, and so probably they will do a more backstage kind of negotiation to try to contain the dictator there. And if they if they have the end game for them would be a regime change, I think it won't go far. And so the idea is try to have some kind of arrangement there, a modus vivendi, let's say, with the dictator, in which he would refrain from developing the nuclear war arms they have there, but at the same time give him assurances that he won't be invaded by the US Army or by the North Korean Army, etc. So you cannot do that without talking to him in a way. Maybe not in a summit, but back channel kind of diplomacy will be necessary. You have to have some kind of direct conversation, and with the help of China. So in the moment in which you have so much tension with China, for other reasons, not for this reason, because China doesn't want North Korea to disappear, but don't want them to develop the nuclear arms too far that could even become a threat for themselves and for the people in that part of China. So there are some interests that converge there that should be part of this conversation. So, but I cannot say which path Biden is pursuing. It's not clear, and maybe it's clear, but I'm not following very closely. So that's what I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Professor Melkevik.
Thanks. It's a big issue because when you're speaking about the French speaking nationalism or Quebec nationalism, you do have a lot of problems. You have the place of French Canadian speaking in Canada, and you have the problem of French speaking in Quebec, and you have the problem with the federal government and their politics, and you have also the problem with the Constitution, and the problem that the Constitution is more or less closed, that it could only be changed indirectly by the Supreme Court of Canada, just placing a political question to the judicial courts. That's the problem, because then you have simply what is strictly the problem. when you go back to Quebec, you see that you have the cultural problem and you have the political problem. If you look at the sentiments of Quebecers, you could say that 1 of 3 want independence, but they want normally different form of independence. Some want it to be really a country like Mexico, Canada, United States, and Quebec. Somebody wants we call it a sort of special status, which will be like a sort of union, Quebec, Canada, and other things. So the problem is simply the problem. What is a nationalism? Because you see that in Quebec, you do not even use the word. It's a no word, because nationalism is associated with something which is negative, something which is excluding somebody and integrating other people. So they do not want to use the word at all. They speaking about the independence, but not of nationalism at all. But then you see that the problem is cultural, and that's the problem that you was announcing, Aziz, about the language. You just see some structural problem inside the Quebec, very nasty structural problem. You just seeing that it's like you have a form of culture separation. A cultural separation where you have Montreal and the rest of the country, Quebec country. And Quebec is just being what? Historically, it was sort of French-speaking worker town with Anglo-speaking aristocracy. Today, it's a simple, more or less, a cosmopolitan town, a world apart. And what we see about immigration, and you see the same in the United States, and we're seeing in Canada. You did have a big period for 10 years, where you did not have this massive immigration that you have today. In the 80s, you was seeing that they was allowing mass immigration because everybody wanted cheap labor. And cheap labor was considered to be a contribution to get a higher national product. But when you have mass immigration, you just have it at one place. And you have this culture structure, which is just making that, what is the language for social climbing? And in Quebec, it's like other parts in the world. If you do want to have social climbing, use English, speak white. And that's simply what's happening in Quebec. You see that Montreal is just speaking more and more English, because when you have 10 persons speaking French, and when you have 1 person speaking English, you have 11 persons speaking English. So you see that that's a culture effect which is taking place. With eroding French in public space. You can see that more and more in Quebec, public space is English in the town, and French is just thrown out as a sort of private language. You speak it at home, you speak it with friends, close friends, but normally you're speaking English when you work, when you are in communication, and then you just have this problem. What's this all this buzz about French-speaking nationalism? Do they exist any longer? And if you just take it on the political level, it's just clear. French-speaking nationalism is dead. It's not real any longer. It's not any threat to Canada, because we have had 2 referendums about independence from Quebec. French-speaking nationalism, in quotes, has lost 2 times, and we do not have the perspective of having a 3rd referendum. And if it would come, they will lose again. So you could just say that on the political level, French-speaking nationalism is just dead. Nothing else as dead. But that's very, very sad in some way. It's sad on the cultural level, because this French-speaking nationalism was very interesting on the cultural level, as it was promoting what you call a sort of literature, poesy, culture investment, theater, and a lot of cultural product, which was just quality products. Something which is just amazing, and was making in Quebec some sort of a culture laboratory for new things. And all this is just going down. And it's in some sort very, very sad. Because culture energy, when you do have it, you do have something which is very, very positive. So just to respond clearly to Aziz, it's simple. What is the future of French-speaking nationalism? I would say there are no future. And I close there.
I'm afraid Professor Melkevik is frozen.
I'm not frozen. I'm just finished with my speaking. So I'm just giving you this what you call the word to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Professor Blondin.
Thank you so much. So the question that I received was regarding the future of online education, which is a great question because of the pivot that higher education had to do in the wake of the pandemic. And it's really timely as many institutions in the United States begin to return to campus for the fall 2021 semester. So the question then is, will online education, will there be more? Will there be a slight increase, or will it remain the same? And what I would say is the hope would be, or the challenge to universities will be not answering that question specifically, but instead positing the need for complete transformation in the wake of that. So I would say a few things need to happen, because we know the future is going to be digital. We know that. We also know that higher education helps shape those futures. So in regard to that, I think what we really need to be prepared for in American higher education specifically is that transformation of the online enterprise and the whole educational enterprise that sort of focuses on the student learner, number one, and also outcomes of teaching, what we want the students to learn, how that will be standardized, and how this can play into a thread that's been brought up throughout our conversation today, which is equity and access, because this is something that allows for that, as well as I think 3 important kind of things that I would bring up, which would be not just the word transformation, which I think is important, flexibility, for students, and the concept of time, time to degree, the thing that it allows students to do, and what in some ways the demand will be there. It's interesting because the American academy can keep up with changes in society, and I think this is the moment for the US to do that in higher education. But we can't just continue to conduct business as usual as it's been done. First, in March 2020, I would say there's sort of been, and this is me speaking off the top of my head, who is not an expert in online education, but I do work in higher education in the United States, which is, from my vantage point, I can see several phases of online education in the United States during the pandemic, because that's what's really sort of driving the question. Even though obviously online offerings predate the pandemic, significant online offerings and institutions devoted to online education. But really from March 2020 to the end of the spring 2020 semester for most institutions in the US, that amounted to 2 to 3 months of instruction. That was really triage, and whole universities pivoting. And I think that some universities got criticism, but what I would submit is the way that institutions in the US and around the world too were able to pivot so quickly in that environment and to provide instruction for students, to me, is nothing short of one of the miracles of COVID-19. To just move the whole university, as I know some of us have said. I happen to be in my office at my university right now, but I know that most of us have conducted work from home, and that we've been able to be very successful in that environment. And of course, things will change. US universities are committed, many of them, to robust campus experiences for the fall, which means in person. But in my opinion, that should also mean, again, learning what we have from the pandemic. Again, that big pivot in that kind of first phase, and then the summer of 2020 to recoup in the United States to offer something much, methodical in instruction for this past academic year. So we've learned a lot in a year and a half. What can we do then to transform education to meet the needs of students and the future? And that, to me, doesn't mean more online. It doesn't mean less online. It means completely rethinking our approach to education and thinking about the needs of our students, thinking about, like I said, equity and access, thinking about students' time to degree. Degrees in the United States are very expensive. How do we help students manage those costs while getting the skills and the education that they need to be successful in the future? It's the idea of global digital knowledge transformation, which is really what we're talking about. And that requires a whole change in our mindset, where we say, hey, what did we learn from the COVID pandemic? What did we learn from pedagogy during the COVID pandemic? How can some of the things, because some things we did better, we did online. It doesn't mean that we should have more, but it means now, at the most basic level, faculty have more in their toolboxes to teach students. But what it also means is that we need to rethink, in the name of equity and access, I think, education, because we can bring costs down for students, and we can do that with high quality. And that's where I think that a standardizing of the process, and I have no suggestions on how to do that, but I think that that's what's going to be required of us. So that's sort of my answer to that question, by kind of not answering it, by saying that the future of online education has to be better education, and actually has to be the future of education in the United States, like full stop. So thank you for that question. It's really provocative.
Thank you. Now you, Jean.
Yeah, just a word on this. I think Jill is so right. My classes will never be the same. The facility with which you can bring specialists from other countries, joining. I've been on 5 thesis boards in Brazil over the last 6 months. I'm co-supervising theses and so on. So this is completely changed. So it will be different. Now, to the question of Canada's relations with China, they've never been worse, basically, since as you may remember, Canada established diplomatic relations with communist China before the United States, and as a kind of challenge, in fact, from Trudeau to Nixon, who hated Trudeau even more as a result. But ever since, I mean, the relationship has been quite fluid. But under the Trump administration, for a number of reasons, but there was a key event. The U.S. asked for the extradition of a high-level executive from Huawei, and that was stopped at the Vancouver airport, and that executive challenged that. So it's been in court ever since. And I mean, we're talking 2.5 years. Shortly after the arrest of that executive, China arrested, honestly, with no justification, no substantive justification, 2 Canadians. They are known now as universally in Canada as the 2 Michaels. On the front page of the Globe and Mail every day, you have the number of days in which when the 2 Michaels have been in prison, for which the 2 Michaels have been in prison in China. See, today I think it's 946. And this is clearly Canada being taken hostage by the Trump administration. But as a result of that, there were lots of tensions, denunciations. At the same time, there's been lots of evidence of Chinese industrial espionage. I mean, people in labs, in high-tech sector. And also there's a large Hong Kong community in Vancouver, and that has been, let's say, that strongly disagrees with much of what China is doing in Hong Kong today. So for all these, and Canada said, well, we will accept people from Hong Kong as refugees, and so for all these reasons, the tensions are higher than they've ever been. Now, as a result of this, a number of people have been asking for very strong measures to be taken by Canada against China. There's been resistance to this on the part of the government, because basically the government says, I mean, I'm too small to have any significant impact, so we need a multilateral effort and so on. And this means engaging the US, which was not easy with Trump, and now is slightly easier with Biden. But this effort has been resisted by business sectors because, as was mentioned, China is a major part of the value chains for Canadian producers of everything, and resistance also from public officials because of the troubled relationship with the United States. I mean, if you want to move away from your dependence on an unpredictable and not now, but until a few months back, an unpredictable bully who could impose from one day to the next massive tariffs on your aluminum exports and completely disrupt your own value chains. What do you look for if you're an open economy? And you look for the other huge economy in the world. So there's been lots of resistance, in fact, within the bureaucracy and in the business sector for trying to balance that. On top of that, there's a very large Asian community in Canada. And in the context of COVID and in the context of the confrontation with about Huawei, there's been a significant rise in anti-Asian racism. I mean, some of my close friends and colleagues are from China, and they are scared of going in the street. There's been insults. It's not reached, I'd say proportionately, I don't know, but I mean, some people have been insulted. I don't remember all-out aggressions, but I can tell you that my Asian friends, especially Chinese friends, are scared for their children. See, so this has generated significant tensions with people saying, well, you know what, maybe I'm done with this country. Okay, so it's a very complicated relationship. What Canada has been doing is trying to build some kind of coalition and work, especially with the U.S. and with the Europeans, to deal with the two Michaels. But more generally, I don't think that it's clear that Canada cannot cut off its relations with China. See, and I think it would not be strategic for Canada to do that. So the government finds itself between a rock and a hard place. See, and I mean, I know people who have this file at Foreign Affairs, and I can tell you that they have their hands full.
Great answers, and so far, great panel. I don't have the intention to provide a wrap up, but just to organize my own thoughts, try to recap some of the views that you have exposed. I especially like the way Jean Daudelin elaborated on the collective action problem that might befall North America at the moment. And it's interesting because if you take it as a geographic unit, it's just 3 countries. I mean, North America is made up of Mexico, the US, and Canada. And still, he has identified that there are 2 North Americas, and I'm inclined to agree with him totally. If you take Canada and US relations, well, there's a lot of integration anywhere you look at. I mean, the academic milieu is just one and the same. I mean, from Brazil, this is what I can see. The economy is fully integrated, migration, and even your soccer, hockey, basketball leagues are one and the same. So there's a lot of integration. And when it comes to US and Mexico, it's an entirely different world. Like I remember President Peña Nieto from Mexico mentioning that every single day, more than 1 million human beings cross the border, the Mexican-American border, legally mostly, of course. But I mean, it's a very vibrant border, and there's a lot going on. And again, from Brazil, what I see is America becoming a truly bilingual country. Canada already was for long, but in America, there's a lot of Spanish these days, and things are getting more diverse. I was also attentively listening to Bjarne's intervention, and I like the way he puts it. There's no problem. I mean, almost none. There's one strategic issue at the heart of all problems, and I again agree with him, and he has cleverly elaborated on his point. So collective action, strategy, it's all connected at the end of the day. And as Jill Blondin, she has put forth, the pandemic is probably a good place or a good subject where all has been included. It's the all-encompassing subject of our time. Like we can see, I mean, every aspect of this region and all the problems of the world as a whole. Actually, as Benoni, he said, whatever happens to North America and particularly to the US is by definition a global issue, right? A global challenge. And I think he's right. So yes, we have been given access to the panoply of problems that now affect one entire region. And I was really lucky to have invited each one of you to provide us with your generosity and your very smart views about the region and the world. Let me just give you one final task, one final question, and I now am I am drawing on the questions which were left on YouTube's chat box by Geraldo Fernandes and Ulisses Panicet. Geraldo belongs to the field of biological sciences, and he's one of our brightest scientists. He's one of those guys who will get published in Nature and Science. So you know what I mean. And he was asking you guys if universities can play any role in the process of curbing inequality. I mean, trying to positively engage and even subvert this new trend, which has been identified by this panel. There's growing inequality in North America and in the world as a whole, but in North America particularly. So as each one of you either belong to universities or have spent some time at universities, so you are familiar with university life, campus life, do you think that universities are left with any role in this process, an important role? And one second question, and now I refer to Ulisses Panicet. Ulisses has been for 30 years or so an WHO officer. So he spent most of his life talking global health issues. And he's also very much, he kept, agreeing with you guys. His comments were very positive. And he is also fearing that you may be right. There's something very bottom-up going on. The civil society should be looked at very carefully, because as I see from Brazil, the perspective that I get is that, especially the US, I wouldn't say Canada. I mean, this doesn't apply to Canada necessarily, might apply, as I have just heard from Jean Daudelin. But the impression that we get is that the US is now like a boiling cauldron, a lot of racial, social tension. So is there room, and let me now be a bit pessimistic, would there be any room for social disruption and I don't know, maybe people taking to the streets and massive demonstrations and things going out of control in the country? Because there is a very polarized country now. There's Trumpism. There was like the Capitol Hill event. And I don't know how this will turn out in the future. So I'd like to hear from you. I mean, am I being too gloomy, too pessimistic in contemplating the possibility of things going out of control in the US particularly? So it's all with you now, my friends. Benoni, your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Starting with Geraldo's question about the role of the university. Of course, I'm not in the university as you are. I've done training as master's degree and PhD, but it was a long time ago. But I think I can, as a citizen, say that university always have a role in trying to find new solutions for the problems we face, society faces as a whole. Because you have in the university people thinking about the problems, people also going through the same problems because they're part of society, and there are a lot of smart people there, and that are able not only to dedicate themselves to thinking, research, and trying to find technical solutions, but also they are engaging with civil society. So this this is something that I think it's a common trait of all universities all over the world, especially in democratic countries. So I see that you have we have to benefit from the university's environment to try to move forward and overcome problems like inequality in different areas, because inequality is a pervasive kind of problem. And it's not only a problem that affects countries and regions within a country, but the whole world, as we witnessed with the problem of the access to vaccines and medical equipment and all that. So I think we need the university here as part of this conversation to move forward. Well, Ulysses, and your question is about the social problems in the US. We saw last year, I'm sure you also followed the situation here when there was this murder of George Floyd and the social unrest that came after, because this is something that is a problem, it's a structural problem here in the US, as we have also in Brazil several structural problems, including of racial nature as well, racial discrimination. Sometimes people think Brazil is a racial democracy and everyone is mixed, so we have but we have, of course, it's a racial problem of different nature than you have here in the US. But the US, you have clearly a problem of inequality, access, and violence, access to public health, public services in general. And if you look at the statistics, you see that who are the ones who are being murdered, the majority are Black and dark-skinned people here, and that people have less access to public to good education and health care and all this. Black people who are the most affected by COVID here in the US, Black and dark-skinned people, right? And Latinos as well. So you have this problem that it's not new here, and it's part of the history of the United States. And so from time to time, you have this social unrest and explosion and some kind of protests, and sometimes it turn violent, right? So instead of just, ignoring the problem, the challenge is how you face it, recognize that there is a problem there, but at the same time, building something positive out of this situation, instead of just, not talking about, now there's no problem, they are just, people who want to disrupt the lives in here, so we have to just law and order on them, or at the same time, of course, you cannot allow the situation that happened here in Chicago, including that people start, breaking everything and doing damage to businesses, and even small business people sometimes that are struggling to keep their jobs, and they lose jobs because they had their businesses destroyed by the mob that came. So you have this complex situation in which I think the only way to move forward here and anywhere, in any place, would be to have a real conversation, a dialogue, not a monologue, because sometimes we have just monologues. People talking on one side, people talk on the other side, and they don't talk to each other. They don't try to build bridges and try to find public policies and investments that are needed to overcome the real problem of real people, right? The problem of inequality here. So I think universities also have a role in trying to find a way here. And if we had more, let's say, diplomatic politicians on each side of the aisle here, as they say, because you have just two parties and we have several aisles in Brazil, right? So they should converge a little bit in some issues. Some issues should not be controversial, right? Recognizing that there is inequality and that this affects the life and the prosperity of families, this should not be controversial. So if you can find common ground here, of course, some will, there will be always disagreement on how to tackle this problem. But if you have common ground in terms of the issues you have to face, maybe you can move forward and build long-term solutions. But I'm preaching here to the converted, I think, and people who know more about this. So, and I'm a foreigner, so but I'm talking, trying to compare the, my experience in Brazil and what I see here, and it's not that different in terms of the conclusions I'm drawing from the problem. That we also need to recognize the problems, find common ground, and there are issues that should not be controversial. That's unfortunately the issues that I think that should not be controversial are the most controversial nowadays. So
that's true. Thank you very much, Bjarne.
We have two questions. The first is about the university and about the university professors. It's very simple. Never trust professors. Professors is one of the problem here. Professor has too much power, and they have too much power in the existing system. We should get rid of them. You should get rid of all the professors which is doing what they should not do. Professors should teach, and they should write books and articles, but they should not do other things because they are a nuisance in the system. What you observe in North America is simply professor has too much power, and they are not prudent at all. They take their concept for the reality, and they just want to realize a concept. And the result is always disastrous. They have destroyed the economy. They have destroyed politics. They have destroyed towns with their plannings, would have no ideas of at all. So you should get rid of them. Give power back to the people. Get rid of the professors and just insist on what people need and what they should do. Give the people the power back. So it's simple. University is not the solution, it's the problem. It's a problem with our structure. We have given a lot of power to the elite. People like me, social, political, legal philosophers, but we should never have that power because you cannot trust us. We react otherwise. We react following. Let's see what I was reasoning. I was reasoning very conceptual about strategy, about structure, about what is under and what's upper, what is the cause and what the effect and so on. That's intellectual reasoning, but it's not political prudence. It's not the prudence. It's not what people need. So I would just say we have taken a bad path. We have taken ourselves too seriously. And we do not have understand what politics is all about. Politics is not what intellectuals think. Politics is from the bottom, from people which are creating something in the practical. So if you want to give power to the elite, you should not simply consider yourself as stupid. You should just simply not go there. So it's for me, it's the question is, the answer to this question is simple. Get rid of all this. The university is not the solution at all. Think clearly. Think about what should be done and why it should be done and what is the issue and what is the part for everybody here. get rid of the professors. The second question, it was about social uprising. And now I will say something very bad about Brazil. Because one of the global challenges which is facing all the regions, the world, is that we will be sometime some sort of Brazilian. A sort of organized disorganization or chaos which is organized and was everybody is living in one island beside one of each other's. It's a simple, we will just have more and more social unrest. And why? That's the question. Why will we have more and more social unrest? Because one thing is that we do not accept authority any longer. We have replaced public, moral, social authority by the authority of myself. I am now the authority, and if I want to, I could just say that a pop star is my authority. I will listen to that person saying, I will surely not never listen to the Pope, because, oh, that's the old things. We see this as simply that our society and ourselves, we're getting more and more egocentric. We just valorize ourselves. And we do not respect any longer political authority. We do not respect any longer moral authority. We consider that we have all this inside ourselves. We do not even make any question of how this is possible. And even how we could have that in a rational way. Because we do not have it in a rational way. Normally we have it in an irrational way. And that is when we're getting social angry. We're getting social angry for everybody, for everything. And we have seen it in the United States. But we have also seen it in Germany and the French. Think about the yellow, what's the English name? The yellow shirts. In any case, you just see that you protest, but what do you protest against? You do not even know it, because you want to just to express yourself against authority, against the state, against the capitalism, against everything. And in any, you are nothing else than a social fascist. And that's the truth about it, because you do not have any politics any longer. You see that at the university, we have just replaced politics that was before. No, you must be moral. You must be correct. You must be for identity politics. You must for dignity politics. But that's not the politic at all, because you do not need anybody else. So we will just see what we have seen in the last 3, more and more unrest. But unrest which was just being nothing. You will have one unrest 1 week and another unrest other week, and it's going on like this. And then we're coming back to Brazil, because we do have had that in Brazil for many years. One unrest, which is just following another unrest. So I will be a little pessimistic. We should maybe take this otherwise. And one thing that we need, retake politics. Go back to politics and demand not what you feel yourself, but how can I build something with others? And what do I need to build with somebody else? But that's another debate. I have just answered the question, and you have understood my position, and I close there.
Very nice. Very provocative. Very, very, very much. Jill.
Thank you. That's a little hard to follow. I'll do my best. And so to answer those two questions, I'm going to intertwine them a little bit because I do think that they're absolutely related. I mean, I thought to myself when you're asking about the university and the role, the roles of university, I know that what I could talk about is I could talk about mentoring, which I think is important, particularly in institutions in the United States, and help kind of bridge that equality for students and financial aid and putting the cost, keeping the cost down for universities. There are so many things. And Benoni also talked about policy. I mean, I think that he said a lot of the change that needs to happen in the United States very well. And a lot of that can live at the university, like I said, in the form of financial aid to students, increased mentoring opportunities, and obviously community colleges, which are huge bridges for equality and economic opportunities for students in the United States. So I think there's so much that could be said in that space. But what I'm going to do is intertwine that question about the role of universities and social disruption. I'm going to weave it in a pretty personal way here in Richmond, Virginia, which is where I live and where my university, Virginia Commonwealth University, is located. Why do I mention this? Because Richmond, Virginia is the former capital of the Confederacy in the United States. And there are, or I should say were, symbols of the Confederacy scattered throughout the city as of last summer. But in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, and an enormous number of, marches on the city and protests, a lot of change. I got to witness it as a resident of Richmond, a lot of change that manifested itself visually within our city. I would say not yet in policy, but the change that we saw that was so swift from a kind of aesthetic standpoint is meaningful because of the messages that it has sent to the community. Some may be familiar with some of the Confederate monuments that lined the streets of Richmond through the magazine National Geographic, which featured the Robert E. Lee statue on the cover, which had been graffitied. There have been like makeshift altars. I mean, it's just the space has been completely transformed. And a lot of the monuments were toppled during the protests. And this was really this very, I would say, very provocative, hegemonic space that really did not serve many of the citizens of Richmond well in terms of the messages that it shared about supremacy. And so having that change occur last year with the swiftness that it did, literally changing the landscape of Richmond, not overnight, but very quickly. And when I moved to the city of Richmond 8 years ago, if somebody had told me in 2013 that by 2020, those monuments that looked as though they had been there forever would be gone, I would have wondered what would need to take place in order to do that. And that symbolic removal, and I'm talking about 6 or 7 statues, forgive me for not knowing, that line one of the most prominent streets in Richmond, which were filled with Confederate statues, which now we have, bases that stand bare, that then bear witness to that social disruption that occurred in the shadow of my university, has been so powerful and in so many ways such an inclusive message that I'm sort of reading the optimism, just as I did in my own presentation, I'm sort of reading the optimism in the city where I live, knowing that policies need to change, knowing that my university, which is already integrated into the community, can continue to be part of that change. And the last thing I would say is by another way that I've seen our university being part of the solution, and so many in the US, has been through the the distribution of vaccines within the city. So making sure that communities are served through our, we have a medical school, but through volunteers. I myself have volunteered. I'm not a trained, I can only treat art history is what I say. I'm an art historian. So, but what I have been able to do is help. And that's been one of the most fulfilling experiences, to see the tangible action that my institution has taken in helping curb the effects of the pandemic. So I gave a really personal answer. Perhaps it's not intending to be overly optimistic, but what it is saying is that when the messages, the visual messages that we see change, then we can start to visualize policy change, which is what needs to happen. So thank you for those questions.
Great. Now, Jean.
I'll follow Jill's path by basically answering them together, starting with the second one. I think a key concept to make sense of what may be happening in the United States, but not just in the United States, is Karen Remmer's expression, exclusionary democracies. And I think there's a number of political systems that would qualify: the United States, no doubt, Brazil, and so on. But I think a large number of well-established democracies have become increasingly exclusionary over the last few years. And what we have is a reaction by those who were excluded. And the reaction is a demand for inclusion, for participation, for rights. See, citizenship as the right to have rights. People reached the conclusion that they did not have the right to have rights, and that's what drew them in the streets. And what's happening now in the challenges, I mean, we've heard a lot about what's happening in the United States, but in Canada, the same thing is happening. The very same thing. I mean, my university, 2 buildings are changing names. University in Toronto, Ryerson University is likely to change its name, okay, because of Ryerson's role in the residential schools for Indigenous people. People are asking for the toppling of the statues of John A. Macdonald, the first Prime Minister of Canada, because of his attitude and discourses about Indigenous people. And many of those people, many of the people pushing for this, are in universities, and I think that that's an important role that universities have to play. I'm not saying that we should forget them, and that's interesting. I think the direction of the debate has been interesting in Canada, because people have said we should not erase this from history, but we should change the way in which we remember those people. Okay, we should have a balanced view of what was the view at the time and so on, but to celebrate them is something else altogether, and we should not be celebrating them. And I think that's happening, and even conservative columnists have been supporting that view. So there's no consensus yet, and I think in the case of John A. Macdonald, I mean, first Prime Minister of Canada, it's unlikely to happen, but there's a number of changes that will be happening that are a recognition of the exclusionary character of Canadian democracies. Okay, and regarding the US, I think all these demonstrations were just additional proofs, okay, of the realities of exclusion and the mobilization. And by the way, from that standpoint, the United States is much more part of South America than of the northern North America, because when I look at what's happening right now in Peru, in Colombia, in Chile, in Brazil, we'll see, exclusionary democracies are under siege. And yes, it's chaotic, but I think Bjarne was asking, aside from my university from firing me, he was asking for people to do politics seriously. I think it's being done right now. The outcome democracy is the contingent outcome of conflict. So we'll see where it goes. But I think we're in an interesting and healthy moment. Thank you.
Great. We have just had a great a basket of very different opinions, right? And all of them very enticing. So thank you for this. And it just occurred to me that in South America, over the last 2 years, we have held 5 presidential elections. Bjarne, in 3 out of 5, teachers/professors won the presidency. So now we know what the problem is, right? We have just reached our 2 hours time limit. So I'll invite my dear colleague, Aziz Saliba, to come up with his final words.
Well, I will be very brief. I'd like to thank all of you for the very thought-provoking considerations. And I would like to thank you for taking part in this discussion. I hope that you get the chance of checking our book, which deals with challenges in all the regions of the world. We have divided, as Dawisson explained, the world in 6 different regions, and that we may soon meet you here in Brazil at UFMG with the traditional pão de queijo, which was well known to Jill, Bjarne, Benoni, and Jean Daudelin.
Thank you, Aziz. Yes, Aziz is right. I should be advertising the Global Challenges book series. You can find the 6 books because, yes, it's a 6-book pack, more than 2,000 pages. This is why I was telling you, this is the kind of thing you just do once in a lifetime. You can find it at www.ufmg.br/DRI/Desafios Globais. I'll send it to you. I'll write it down. It's easier. But thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to spend the last 2 hours with you. And I really look forward to reaching out to you anytime soon.